Yeah, so welcome everybody. My demonstration will be about using web components with React, as I told earlier, but for those who are coming in late. And a lot of the time when I see discussion online about web components and React in the same sentence, it's almost always web components versus React. So I don't think that's the right approach to the situation. And in my opinion, it should be web components with React, as web components are more of a transition layer or a ease of use layer than a fully fledged library like React itself. So it would make easy for, say, different kind of product teams to share their design systems between different tech stacks. So if the tech stack would be written in web components, it would be a lot easier to implement it on all of the different libraries like React without having to rewrite the whole component from scratch. And I'll be showing with a live coding demo here how you could integrate a web component into a React app. And in my opinion, every time you are creating something that uses an external library, here we will be using a vanilla colorful component that is built without dependencies, so it's a pure vanilla web component. So every time we implement something like this into our project, I think you should always do a local component that just implements it, so it's easier to swap if you decide to swap the libraries. So we start by creating our color picker component, and we are currently missing it, of course, which means we will need to create a new JavaScript file for it. And in the JavaScript file, we will just export our color picker, which gets some props as a parameter and returns, well, we can just test out it works by using the classic hello world, hello React Finland here. And if we import it here now, we can just make sure it works. And fair enough, we see hello React Finland here. I have already installed Vanilla Colorful into my code sandbox, which means that I can immediately start working on it. And when you're working with web components, when you usually would import something in React, you would import the actual React class. But with web components, it's usually that you just React the dependency or the package, and the side effects of the dependency will declare the custom element into the scope. And now we can immediately use our custom element, our web component, whichever you want to call it, and we can immediately see it's working on our React project. So custom elements for those uninitiated are just basically custom HTML tags with built-in functionality, which you can modify with JavaScript and CSS. And if we look into the DOM tree, we can see that our hex color picker is visible in the DOM tree as well as a custom element. We can modify it as we want, and we can, of course, if we have a color picker, we want to have some properties and events we want to assign to it. Well, this implementation of color picker gives us the possibility to, for example, set the default color that's at the time set. So we just give our React component the color property, our attribute here. It's passed as a prop into our color picker as anything you put into a React component. And at this point, we can just trickle it down onto our web component. And as soon as we do it, we can see that we are seeing my favorite hex color, FF6D00, which is this great shade of orange. We can see it on the color picker. And if we inspect it in our DOM tree, we can also see that it's actually implemented as an attribute into our web component. In React, when you give something as a property like this, it's always given as a property instead of an attribute, which means that in JavaScript world, properties can be basically any complicated object you can think of. It's a JSON object, it's an array, it's a Boolean or anything. But with attributes, you run into some limitations. For example, you can only have string-based attributes. So our color property is great. Our color attribute is great since it's just string. but we will later see how we would do if we need to actually bind some properties to our hex color picker. So there's the three things that we need to look into when we want to get our custom element working. It's the attributes, it's the properties, and it's the events. Those are the three things that usually make up all the components you have on your web page. And this custom element has a event that is called color changed. It's a custom event which gives us information about the color when it changes. And being used to React, you might be like, oh, that's easy. We could just say on color changed. We could just call on color changed, which we can implement above here. On color changed. And we would take the event and we would, of course, log it to see it works. But as we can see, our log is currently completely empty. That's because it's not that easy. The problem with web components and React currently is that React uses synthetic events, whereas web components and a lot of other frameworks use the DOM events that are shipped with browsers, so events that are created with add event listener. To be able to create compatibility with these layers, we need to actually bind the event using the add event listener function. And to do that, we have to, of course, get the reference to our color picker so we can access it in code. And that's, of course, done with the React hook use ref. Then we can just set the ref to our color picker. And if we would then see what the ref is changed to, we would use the use effect so we can observe the changes to our element. And every time it changes, this gets triggered, and we can see that if we look at what's in the color picker ref's current reference, we can see our hex color picker there. We now have a reference to our component, so we can modify it, we can access its properties and add event listeners. And adding event listeners is what we are going to do next. So to make it easier on us and also make it easier to clean up after ourselves, we will set the current reference into a variable called elem and just add the event listener through it. And as we saw here, the actual name of the event is color changed. It's not a traditional event that is on all DOM elements. It's a custom event that the custom element dispatches as the color changes. And we want to then add the color changed as the callback of that event. And if we refresh our page, we can see that our custom elements are triggering like crazy here. And we can inspect our event here, and we can see all the data about our event. But the data we are currently interested in is the value of the color. And that's shipped with the detail property of our event. And inside the detail property, we have a value field that has the current color. So inside our color changed field, we can write up that the color is the e.detail.value, so e.event.detail.value. And if we would now log it, we can see easily, let's refresh the page so everything updates. Code Sandbox sometimes might get a bit messy. We can see that the event is logged there. And we can also do some pretty CSS magic with our console logs. So we could add some color here. So we could say color change to color and then give it a CSS attribute called color. And now if we are going to refresh our page again, just to be sure, we can see that our console logs are colored with the color of the current color picker that we are using and the current value. So, all right, we have attributes checked up, we have events checked up. And it's only this little so-called boilerplate code to make it work. We could also just reduce this to this if we didn't want the console logs. But being in React world, we might want to use React State because React State is just a good tool to have, and it makes it easier to have the state for the whole component. So we would, of course, have the two attributes or properties here that the useState hook provides us. And we could just make the default value either be from the props or just a plain FFFFF value. And now we can just move the color binding here into that also. And every time our color is changed, so inside our onColorChange function, we can just call on set current color, and we can just set the color here. So if we look at our inspector now, and we look inside our DOM tree, we see our hex color picker here. Now every time, well, Code Sandbox did a demo effect there. Now every time we update our web component with a new value, we see that our attribute inside the DOM tree also gets updated. So we have all the reflection of attributes working with our web component with this little so-called boilerplate code. And we also have the state inside of our color picker, which we can then modify easily. And even if we were to change the implementation of our color picker, we still have the functions and hooks ready to set up here. And now to the third part that is part of almost every component, the properties. The properties are something that React usually does under the surface. You see the props word a lot, and the prop stands for properties, of course. Well, for custom elements, you have to have, again, the reference to our object to pass properties. But luckily, we already have that because of our event demo here. So now if we wanted to make it so that we didn't reflect it with an attribute, but instead we had it as a property, we would, of course, remove it from the actual render here. And we would create another useEffect hook. This time we would be binding it to the current color. So every time the current color is changed, this hook gets triggered. And the only thing we need to do here is get the current reference of our object and just straight up manipulate the property color inside of our color picker. You can see that our color is changing. We see that the event is getting triggered. And if we inspect our element, we see that the attribute is not on the DOM tree anymore. So we are purely working with properties here. And you might be thinking, oh, this is really easy, like just 30 lines of React code with some comments and all types of stuff, and we have implemented our color picker into our React project. Well, I'll say it now. It gets even easier. There's a really popular web component library called Lit that is done by the former Polymer team, nowadays Lit team at Google. And they have done a perfect tool inside their Lit Labs called Lit Labs React. I already have it inside my project as a dependency. So it's just at litlabs/React. And what that library has is a nice function called, let's see, color picker. So we just export a constant instead of our function, and we assign it the value of litlabs' create component. This is just a function that takes a few parameters. It takes the React instance. Let's just import that too. And then it takes the tag name. We had the hex color picker. It takes the actual web components class, which in this case is hex color picker, which we can easily import from our vanilla colorful library. And then it takes the nice information, which is the events. So earlier I said I wanted to use the name on color changed when the actual color changes the event. Well, I can map it to the actual DOM event. So this is what I want to use in React, and this is what the actual name of the event is. Now we can see that our implementation is still intact. The color can be changed. And if we were to just take this onColorChanged function from here, move it to our app level, and then we would just call it here, onColorChanged. onColorChanged. We will see that as soon as we refresh, the event gets triggered again. and it's on the top level, and it's with just this little code. So we can just throw all of this into the garbage and use just this little compatibility layer to implement our web component as a React component. Of course, this has its caveats, like you are using it kind of bare bones. So if you wanted to add some extra functionality, the earlier approach I showed you with the hooks and everything is maybe your way to go. But if you actually just have a nice ready-built design system that has everything, batteries included, and you just want to create React components with it, the LitLabs React is just a perfect tool for it. You write literally 7 lines of code. It could be like minified into 1 line of code, and you get a React component you can use with events and property bindings functioning as they are supposed to. And I already see there might be some discussion and
there
questions.
might be some discussion. Yeah. What's your least favorite hex color?
Oh, that's a hard one. It's like the bright green that's sometimes when you mistype some hex color, it just hurts your eyes so much.
Yeah, there's some colors you should never ever use.
Yeah.
If you have multiple web components on the same web page using React or some other shared code, is there some way to avoid the browser downloading the common code multiple times?
Well, I mean, if you are using a bundler, for example, it should package the code so it doesn't use the same code multiple times. But if you are importing from for example, a CDN, well, then you are accepting the risks at bay at that time. Like until we have import maps, it's almost impossible to have like all of the code bundled unless you are using a bundler like Webpack or Rollup. But if you are using those, they should be smart enough to bundle the code so it doesn't make the implementation appear multiple times, just the way you would use it in React, for example.
So can you tell a little bit more about import maps? Because I assume not everybody knows the feature.
Yeah, so import maps are a feature that is maybe landing into a browser's soon TM, which would make it so that you could declare in your HTML the relative imports you have in your project, and you could point them into like static paths, for example, into a CDN. So you could import React from a CDN, and you could make your libraries also use those imports instead of the relative import paths. But it's a feature that hasn't shipped almost at all yet, as far as I know. Some browsers might have it, but
so I guess we have to wait and wait.
Yeah.
So does the web component mount as soon as it gets imported and just shows up when it's structured by the React component?
The web component doesn't mount until it is created. So web components usually are created using the document create element. Like almost all the libraries use it under the hood at some point, or just by appending it as HTML on your page. Like when you import it, it just it tells the browser the implementation details of a custom element tag, but it doesn't mount before you actually mount it like you would mount a React component. So it mounts at the same step as it would on React's component did mount from the older React component classes.
All right, that makes sense. So how would I use the second method in the React project? I mean, I think that's the last demonstration. I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I would say, like, if you, for example, were using a library like Shoelace, there's a really popular web component design system called Shoelace. You can find it Shoelace at .style. It's a custom elements or web components library that actually ships a React component version of it, which uses only the lit element bindings, as far as I know, to make it compatible. All the React bindings as like a compatibility layer to make it compatible. So you could just, as I showed you in the demo, you could, in the same way, use it in your own React projects. Like it doesn't really take that much setup. It's just the import litlabs/React and just create your components with the create component function.
Yeah, so I remember that we had a long time like discussion about web components, like year by year. Like, is it the year of the web components? Is the year of the web components? Do you think it's the year of the web components now, or maybe next year?
I think next year is going to be crazy. Like this year alone has been a huge year for web components in general. They have been getting adopted more and there's more and more tooling and more and more like people working with them. There's companies like Nintendo, Ubisoft, uh, a lot more that I could name, like big companies that are using web components. So they are like getting adopted more and more. Like I don't think they will be replacing something like Vue or React because web components aren't a like a fully fledged library. They are more like the name says, components. So I think next year is going to be like the biggest year so far, and that's what I said last year also. So don't know about that.
Yeah,